This morning I want to just review a little bit. There are those of you that weren't here last week as we started a new sermon series. And I know you're supposed to start a new sermon series on the first Sunday of the year. That's the way you're supposed to do it. But when was the last time I ever did something the way you're supposed to? So we didn't do that. So I want to just kind of catch you up a little bit. The theme of this sermon series that we'll go through probably through the end of February is going beyond. Now, why that theme? Why that phrase? What's the thought behind that? Well, it's too easy in life sometimes to just kind of hit a level. And you just kind of stay on that level. You just kind of function. You go through the motions. And really, in some ways, it's very comfortable. You get comfortable at a certain spot, maybe in your life, in your job, and you just think, oh, I'm just going to kind of cruise here the rest of the days until I retire. Or maybe in a relationship, you think, well, I've done this for so many years, I don't have to, work at it anymore. Or even in your spiritual life. Maybe that's the most dangerous area where we just kind of hit a level when you think, all right, I'm just going to kind of stay right there and I'm going to be okay and just hang out. Well, as you begin a new year, it's a great time of the year to start about new things, think about new things in your life. And it's very common, as Robert started off with, talk about New Year's resolutions and things. I'm not going to challenge you to make a New Year's resolution, all right? What I am going to challenge you is this. What's it going to take for you to go to the next level? To go beyond where you are? Have you arrived in all the areas of your life that you need to arrive? Or is there a possibility that you need to grow a little bit? That you need to go beyond where you find yourself now? How do we think about that? How are we going to study that? We're going to look at a guy by the name of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. And the situation was this. Nehemiah was living in Babylon. He was a Jew. But the reason he was a Jew in Babylon is because several years earlier, the Babylonian Empire came across the way and they took over the land of Palestine. And they surrounded Jerusalem. And they broke down its walls. And they captured the people. And they carried them off to be slaves in the land of Babylon. For 70 years, the children of Israel were slaves in the country of Babylon. Then at the end of that time, some of them went back to Jerusalem. They were released. They were able to go back. And then eventually a guy by the name of Ezra, he went back and he decided they wanted to reestablish themselves as a people. So the first thing they did is they rebuilt the temple. The temple was the central place of worship for the children of Israel, for the Jewish nation. So they rebuilt the temple, and then we don't know exactly what happened. They just kind of leveled off. And then in Nehemiah chapter 1, it starts off with a guy by the name of Nehemiah who was the cupbearer of the king. He's the guy that got to taste all the wine and the food before the king did. Now, why did they have that job? Because they didn't want someone to poison the king. So if Nehemiah drank something and dropped over, they knew that was not good wine, all right? And but that was his job. He was a slave. He was a servant. But his brother had been back to Jerusalem. And he comes back and he gives a report to Nehemiah. Nehemiah says, hey, how are things going back in Jerusalem? And his brother said, oh man, things are a mess. You wouldn't believe it. The walls are broken down. The gates are in rumbles. They've stopped everything. And we found out that Nehemiah at that point was brokenhearted. He said he mourned, he fasted, and he prayed. Because he knew that if the walls had not been rebuilt and the gates were not reestablished, their people would have no security and they would always be subjected to whoever wanted to come in and take over them. And he mourned and he fasted and he prayed. That was the beginning of him going beyond. There was a lot that needed to be done. No one else was stepping up to the plate. No one else was taking in leadership. So Nehemiah decided to go beyond where everyone else was. And he broke the mold. He began to pray. Well, that's where we pick it up today. In the book of Nehemiah, you will find one characteristic and quality about Nehemiah that's consistent. You will find him praying in a lot of different situations. And today I want us to focus on the character of Nehemiah in his prayer life that causes us and challenges us to go beyond where we are in our own prayer life. So, grab your Bible, turn to Nehemiah 2. I'm going to put it on the screen also. And here's where the story picks up. And the first thing I think we can learn is that in prayer, we need to be patient. Here's why. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. Early the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. There you go. He's doing his job. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, so the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified. But I replied, "Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." Patience is essential in prayer. Now, if you look back at Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, we find that the story opens, and it's unusual, but it gives the month. In the month of Kislev, or Kislev. We know through the Jewish calendar that that is the month of December. That's when Nehemiah got the initial report from his brother that things are a mess, and then he broke down and he began praying about that. Now in chapter 2, verse 1, all of a sudden it's the month of Nisan. Now what is that? Is that a super car sale in the days of Nehemiah? No. The month of Nisan is the month of April. Now, there had been 4 or 5 months, because we don't know exactly when they started praying, 4 or 5 months that Nehemiah had been praying about this situation. That takes a lot of patience. You ever heard the preacher say, "Well, what you do, you need to pray about this. You need to go home and pray about this." And you say, "Okay, that's good advice." So you go home on Sunday night and you pray about it, and you wake up Monday morning and you look around and think, "All right, nothing has changed." And then maybe I'll try it again. All right. So Tuesday or Monday night you pray, and you wake up Tuesday morning ready to, take the world, and then, oh man, nothing has changed again. And Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday, you wake up and still the same, and you think, well, what's the use? God's not even listening. I'm just going to go on, forget about it. What I love about this story here in Nehemiah, 4 to 5 months, he's praying. In chapter 1, he prayed for the sins of his fathers. He prayed for the sins of his family. He prayed for his own sins. He said, "Lord, forgive us, for we turned our back on you." And he just consistently prayed for 4 months. I think that's something that we can learn from. I think it's something that we need to pick up on. Because it's so easy for us to get it all figured out. And if God doesn't do it the way we want it, then, God's missed the boat. Nehemiah, for 4 months, 5 months, prayed over and over. And patience is essential when it comes to prayer. The second thing is, I think, essential with that patience is looking for open doors and seeing how God might work in situations. It's interesting in the text it says there, the king sees him and says, "I had never appeared sad in his presence." So the king asked, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. What's going on?" Even though Nehemiah was patient in prayer, I can't help but wonder if he didn't come to the point where he said, "Oh man, I've had it. Nothing's happening. Nothing's going to happen." And then he goes in that day to the king, and it's just he's downcast. And remember, he sees the king probably at least twice a day, if not 3 times a day. So the king knew him well. The king could see where he was at. And there was something there about Nehemiah's countenance that he was no longer his happy-go-lucky self. You know what I appreciate about the Bible? I appreciate about the honesty there. Because sometimes we live our lives and we get this impression that you're always supposed to be smiling all the time, giving high fives to people, and always put on this plastic smile, especially when you come to church. You got to put on a plastic smile. You've had a terrible day. Someone says how you are. Oh, I'm doing great, doing good. And then inside, sometimes we're dying. Well, that particular day, Nehemiah was dying, and he wasn't hiding it any longer. And it's okay to be real. In fact, I recommend it. It's okay to be real. I remember one time when I was minister of the other church up north, we'd gone through a search process for, I can't remember what the position was for. It was a youth minister or music minister or something. And we'd gone through this process, and the committee, we thought we'd found the right person, and we were ready to offer this person the position. In fact, did call him offering the position, and then he turned us down. It's kind of like, oh, man. I got up the next morning. It was Sunday morning, and I was just kind of down. And I shared that to the congregation. It was just kind of a bummer. And, some people came up and said, basically said, you have no right to be sad. What are you acting like that for? Well, that's the way I feel, we put expectations on people. People put expectations on us. And Nehemiah, he'd bummed out. And the king noticed it. And the king said, what's going on? Really, being real is maybe the best way to do it, isn't it? When we're impatient in prayer, and we don't always have to have it all figured out. We don't always have to have the right answers or the right words. You just have to be honest and patient. Now, what in the world did Nehemiah pray for all that time? What had he done? Well, we actually know that. Nehemiah 1:11 says this, O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those of us who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success today. And he could have gone on there by saying, please grant me success by giving everything I need and just having those things done and blah, blah, blah. He says, please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it into his heart to be kind to me. See, sometimes patience in prayer comes when we're actually praying for another person. And that can be tough. Because maybe they're not changing the way we think they should change. Or maybe they're not doing something as quickly as we think they should do it. Or whatever the situation. Nehemiah was in a situation here where he couldn't go into the king and says, excuse me, king, I was looking through my contract last night. And I noticed in paragraph 3, article 4, line 5, it says here that I can take a leave at any time I want for as long as I want. He was a slave. Everything in his life was controlled by the king. So who does he pray for? He prays for the king. What does he pray for? He prays that God might change his heart. Maybe in prayer, one of the most agonizing things is to be praying for somebody and they're not changing the way you want them to change. Or not changing as quick as you would like them to change. Nehemiah, 4 months, 5 months, prayed. And he prayed this prayer. Lord, grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put into his heart to be kind to me. Then God did his work. And on that day in the month of Nisan, the king noticed and asked, why is it you're looking so sad? What's wrong? You're not sick. You must be deeply troubled. And then the next phrase, I love this also, then I was terrified. But I replied, long live the king. He says, how can I be happier? How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins and the gates have been destroyed by fire. I love that phrase. I was terrified. He didn't have it all figured out. He didn't have all the answers, but he was willing to be honest and just admit it. And he was terrified. So patience in prayer is so important. And it may involve a lot of different emotions along the way. It may be a roller coaster ride. But Nehemiah hung in there and patiently prayed. And that led to the next thing I think we can learn. He was also consistent in his prayer life. Because listen to what happens in verse 4. It says, when the king asked, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied. With the prayer to God of heaven. He's been praying for 4 months. Why in the world does he have to pray some more? I love that phrase though. It's like he's going through his life and things are going along. Then all of a sudden the door opens wide up and he didn't say, well, God, it's about time. Where have you been? I've been doing this for 4 or 5 months. Forget it. I'm done with it. No. The door opened and he just shot up a prayer. Some people I've heard him call popcorn prayers. Just poof, poof, poof. And to me it says that Nehemiah was consistent in his prayer life. Too many times we think of prayer as a formalized thing. It's something you only do at church, or it's something you only do at meal times, or it's something you only do at nighttime. That it's got to be just right, and the right formula, and the right posture, and all this stuff. That's not it at all. Nehemiah was terrified. His moment had come, and he said a prayer, Lord, this is the moment. I think he maybe repeated that prayer from verse 11, chapter 1. Lord, make the king's heart favorable to me today. And then he just said, I replied. A consistent prayer life sometimes means, others would call it conversational prayer. And it's probably something that we need to work on. What are some times you can pray? Well, if you drive here in Bonita, get into that habit, okay? Or maybe you've been there. You've had a job interview going on, and Lord, just help me out here. Or maybe you're in school and you got this big test. Lord, help me out here. Or maybe it's that conversation you've been putting off with this person. Lord, give me the words to say. And those are good things to do, to have that conversational prayer as you go along. But I think it's even better when we can get to the point where it's not just asking for something we need right at the moment, because we are used to doing that, but also to be able to just say, Lord, I thank you for today. Thank you for the sunrise. Thank you for the ability to get up and to get moving. Just this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And when we can develop that type of prayer life, then when those big times come, it's not going to be something you have to manufacture. It's going to be something that can just happen out of the outflow of your heart. So, prayer, we need to be patient in it. We need to be consistent in it. And then the third thing I think we see in the rest of the story is, when we've done it, we need to be ready. Because when God moves, we need to be ready. Verses 6 through 10, I only put a couple of lines on the screen up there, but let me read the whole passage. The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, how long will you be gone? When will you return? And after I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, if it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through all their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. And I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, and for the city walls, and for a house for myself. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. And when I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letters to them. The king, I should add, had sent along an army, officers and horsemen to protect me. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite heard of my arrival, they were displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. Now, verse 10 there about Sanballat and Tobiah, that's just kind of a teaser for what's to come. Because even though God's prayers were answered, it wasn't going to be smooth sailing from here on out. And we'll talk more about how you deal with conflict here in a week or so. But focus on what happened. He prayed that prayer. He popped out a prayer to God. And God turned the heart of the king and said, what is it you need? And then he was ready to act. He said, well, I tell you what. It's almost as if he had thought through this. He said, what I need is I need some papers that will give me safe travel through all these lands. And then when I get back to the place there, I'm going to need some wood. So can you give me a letter that will allow me to get all the timber that I need? And the king said, yeah, no problem. And then what happened? The king went even beyond what he had requested. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to send some of my army officers with you and some horsemen with you. And as you travel, they're going to protect you to make sure that you get there to be able to do the things that you want to do. God went over and above what he had prayed for. And what was Nehemiah's attitude? Well, it's about time, God. I waited long enough for this. No. Verse 8. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. When a door opened, Nehemiah saw the door. And in the attitude of prayer, he proceeded. He had thought things out. And God not only granted his request, but he granted over and above his request. Prayer is not some magic formula. And it may not always work out exactly the way we thought it was going to work out. But I still believe prayer is one of the beginning steps of going beyond where we are in our walk with God. Be ready to walk through open doors. And as I thought about this sermon and, how it relates to my own life, there's times I get wrapped up in, the rut, and my family could tell you, at mealtime, sometimes I pray the same prayer. They could probably quote it. At other times, I look back and I see times really when I could really understand maybe what Nehemiah was going through. I'll just share one with you. I've shared this before, so I apologize if you're bored through this story, if you've heard it before. But there was a time in my other ministry up in Springfield when I'd been there about 25 years. I served there. I had the privilege of serving at the church for 28 years, 13 years as youth minister and 15 years as preaching minister. When I turned 50 and when I hit that 25-year mark, it was kind of like, Lord, is this what you want me to do? Is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? And I just began wrestling with that. And I'd kind of pray, well, Lord, if there's something out there, let me know. But not really meaning it because I was really comfortable. To be honest with you, it was a nice church, good situation. Things were going well. We'd moved into one of the nicest homes we'd ever moved in. And it was just, Judy had a good job. And it was just very comfortable. But there was something in my heart that was just unsettled. And I remember going to a Bob Russell retreat. He does mentoring retreats where he takes 8 guys and spends a week with them. And one night I was in the room there and I remember getting down on my knees and praying, Lord, okay, this time I really mean it. If you have something else, let me know. And went home the next week. Still remember the day. I answered the phone. It was Rocky Barron. And Rocky said, hey, we're looking for another minister down here in Bonita Springs. If you know anybody that may be interested, let me know. And I said, well, I don't know of anyone that's really interested, but I'll let you know. And hung up the phone. And it's like, as soon as I hung up the phone, it's like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, excuse me. What was it you prayed just last week? And okay. So went home, talked to Judy, and we just said, well, maybe, if this is where God wants us, we'll just see what happens. And make a long story short, here I am. And we were just talking yesterday. Said, boy, it'd be really tough to move now. We hope that we're here for a long time. And God, I believe, worked in that situation, and it didn't come overnight, and it wasn't without turmoil that happened. But that's the moment I look back on my life and I said, oh, wow. That's when I went beyond where I was at. I don't know what you're dealing with in your life right now. I don't know where you're at. Maybe it's a job change. Maybe it's relationship issues. Maybe it's finance. I don't know. But God knows, and I encourage you to go beyond, to be patient, be consistent, and then be ready to act when God opens doors in your life. And then see how He blesses over and above maybe what even you had planned to do. It's an act of faith. Trust in Him. Go beyond and let God do His thing. Let's pray.